I'll call this meeting to order at 5:30 p.m.
Okay, we'll get started with a roll call. Committee member Penny Owens. Present. Committee member Chris Klein.
Present.
Committee member Lori Gaskin.
Present.
Committee member Lee Heller.
Present.
Committee member Todd Rulon-Miller.
Present.
Vice Chair Stephanie Moret.
Present.
And Chair Ann Burdett.
Present.
All here. And sorry, just a quick reminder, if we can use our mics, make sure you turn it on before. I know we haven't been in this space in a while, but if you can turn it on before speaking, that'd be great. And then Anne, if you want to push the agenda along, or I'm happy to help with that.
Okay, I'm still figuring out how the role of the chair is, since this is my first meeting chairing and I'm just going off of the other board that I chair. But I guess I will make the motion that the committee waive the reading and approve the minutes of the special meeting of November 21st, 2025.
A clarification for the chair. Usually other committee members make motions.
Oh, okay.
And you can ask for a motion.
Oh,
and say,
okay.
is there a motion
Thank
too?
you.
But usually the chair is sort
These
of
are
the
all
person
things
who
I'm
hangs
learning.
back and gets other people to do it. And if nobody does it, cracks the whip.
Oh, okay. Then
that
does
okay?
anyone else have that motion?
I'm happy to move waiving of the reading and adoption of the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay. And then do I do roll call vote, or is it just all in favor?
We can just do an all in favor.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, passes unanimously.
Okay, moving right along. We don't have any agenda adjustments tonight.
Is there any public comment on any item that is not currently scheduled on the agenda?
We have no speakers for public comment online or in person.
Or any committee member and staff communications?
The one thing I have is a committee member asked for an update on the creek buffer ordinance, and so just to share that with the committee, we do have a request for proposals out right now to get consultant help with that, and we just extended the deadline actually out to the end of February. So we're really hopeful we'll get some good proposals out of that and continue to move that forward.
If I may make a comment regarding the creek buffer ordinance. Just as a point of information, I've changed my residence. So the last time this was up for discussion, I appropriately was asked to leave the discussion because I lived next to Mission Creek. I now live in Buellton, California. So further discussion, I would be happy to be invited to if it's appropriate.
So then I guess we have agenda item number 7A, the presentation on the draft wastewater and water systems climate adaptation plan.
Yes, thank you, Chair Burdett. I'm happy to introduce Melissa Hetrick here today, our Adaptation and Resiliency Manager. She's going to give you guys an update on the recently released draft of the wastewater and water systems climate adaptation plan. This is, really critical city infrastructure, very close proximity to Laguna Creek and our coastal shoreline, and really vulnerable to increased flooding from stormwater flooding in the creek itself, as well as sea level rise and changes due to intensification of storms. So I'll turn it over to Melissa to give you an overview.
Thanks. Good evening. I'm Melissa Hetrick, Adaptation and Resilience Manager. And am I pulling this? Okay, look at that. I did want to bring to your attention the contents of this plan because the findings really end up relating a lot to water quality and much more than we even thought. And so I wanted to make sure that this committee was aware of the findings and had a chance to comment. So we released a draft wastewater and water systems climate adaptation plan in December at Council. And we have a comment period going until mid-February. And then we'll be taking the plan back to Water Commission for a recommendation and then to council for approval. So just quickly, because I don't think I've done this at this committee, we now have an adaptation and resilience division at the city, and we run an adaptation program. And really that program helps our community prepare for current and future climate-related hazards. So increased in flooding from rainfall hazards, wildfire erosion, and sea level rise hazards. And really, I'd like to point out that this program, while coordinated out of our division in the Sustainability and Resilience Department, is really being implemented throughout the city. I myself can't widen a creek, or I myself can't manage water supply planning. And so really, we are the hub, but the implementation is really happening across the city, and we have many partners across the city. So I just want to call out those partners, including the Creeks Division, because they're really doing the lion's share of this work. So really, the program takes a multi-pronged approach, so incorporating climate changes into city planning documents, things like water supply planning, reducing flood and erosion risks, so projects such as the widening of and restoration of Lower Laguna Creek is an example of that. Adapting city infrastructure, so as you'll hear about today with the wastewater system, looking at modifications to building standards, so that includes the creek buffer ordinance, also looking at do we need to be flood proofing to higher elevations in certain areas of the city. And then really looking to provide the community the resources to adapt. As you know, the portions of our city that flood the most frequently are also the low-income portions of the city. And so we need to be really taking a close look at that. And then as you'll hear later, when we start getting into costs of some of these measures, we really need to be planning for the future costs associated with these projects. We can get, and we are actively pursuing state and federal funds and have been very successful at that, but there will always be a need for a local permanent source of funding to match these funds and get projects going and planned. So that is a task in the next few years. So as you might recall, we had a sea level rise adaptation plan in 2021, and this included a number of very high priority items to kind of start right away. One of them was to look at the wastewater system in particular. And so we've basically been pulling off all those highest priority items and getting them funded and doing them. When we've been doing them, we're not just looking at sea level rise, we're looking at all the other hazards, in particular the hazards we're seeing now from increased flooding. But this really set forth a whole plan for the city of phasing our approach to adaptation planning and really monitoring changing conditions and taking different actions as we hit different milestones. So these are our active major projects. We've gotten over $5 million to date. We are well on our way on several of these. The Regional Coastal Adaptation Monitoring Program, we've started, a plan went out in August on this, and we started a pilot of monitoring with Beacon in our region, changes on our coastline. We have this plan. We are launching in just a few months release of some of the adaptation options we're looking at for the waterfront to deal with the storm surges and erosion that we're already seeing on the waterfront. We also are launching a stormwater model and capacity improvements on Laguna watershed. And that's just starting. And then the airport climate adaptation plan is kind of mid-plan right now too. All right, so getting into the wastewater plan, this was led by the Adaptation and Resilience Division with Water Resources Department and Public Works Engineering. Our main consultant team was led by Water Systems Consulting, so that's a wastewater and water systems engineering firm, with a sub being Environmental Science Associates. And the work was funded by Coastal Conservancy and California Coastal Commission. So again, I just mentioned the milestones and where we're at with the project. So this plan did look at all types of hazards. to all portions of the water and wastewater system. All you're going to hear about tonight is the wastewater system. And the reason is when we did our risk assessment, the highest priorities were all in the wastewater system, all the biggest vulnerabilities. A lot of that is because of our diversified water portfolio and the work we've already done in that regard with the water systems. And so the wastewater is really what you're going to hear about. But we did look at all the other systems. Again, proposing a phased implementation, and there's a major assumption in the study that in particular in our low-lying area that floods frequently, we are looking at citywide flood control measures and adaptation measures that could lessen flooding risk. But the assumption in this study, particularly because for the wastewater system, because it's so critical, is that we cannot fully prevent flooding in that low-lying area. And that is true. We cannot. There's no flood control project that's going to eliminate flooding in that area. And so while some of these citywide flood control measures can delay the need for some of these adaptation measures for the wastewater system, all of the adaptation measures will eventually be needed, if that makes sense. So, yeah. So as part of this, we did utilize new projections for sea level rise and get new hazard maps developed that are more accurate for the city. So these are the amounts of sea level rise we're now working with. So from now until 2050, we're looking at 0.8 feet of sea level rise, 2.5 feet by 2075, and then around 5 feet at the end of the century. We've experienced about 3 to 4 inches of sea level rise to date. So these are the new coastal flooding risk maps. They only show flooding from the ocean, so they don't show rainfall flooding or creek flooding. And so the aqua color is flooding of the regular high tide, so like the twice a day regular high tide. Then you have the 1-year storm event, which is the 1-year wave event, another way to say it, the 20-year event, and then the 100-year event. So right now, you see that most of the impacts are south of Cabrillo Boulevard. However, you do see that there are some low-lying areas like Cabrillo Ballfield where we are already seeing salt water coming into that field area through storm drains and the groundwater that's killing the grass there. So these remain low-lying areas that are impacted. So moving to 0.8 feet of sea level rise, we start to see the annual storm surge cross Cabrillo Boulevard in the vicinity of West Beach. And then we start seeing kind of the move northward toward the railroad tracks by 2065. And then moving on till the end of the century when we start to see north of Cabrillo, Highway 101, we start seeing the flooding from the regular high tide. And again, this is what happens if we do nothing. So some of you will recognize this map as being the almost exact map of the historic El Estero tidal wetland that was filled in after the big earthquake in the 1920s and remains a very low-lying area that floods both during rainfall events and then in the future it's more likely to flood from storm surge. So with regard to erosion projections, Ledbetter Beach is actually holds up pretty well over time because the harbor breakwater essentially acts like a groin holding the beach in place, but we do see some erosion, but we see a lot of potential for keeping the beach at Ledbetter in the future. Same thing with West Beach, because it's protected by the harbor breakwater, we really don't see a lot of erosion even till the end of the century at West Beach. That is not true on East Beach. We are currently at this time, even with the dredge and beach nourishment operations, seeing an erosion rate of 5 feet per year at East Beach. This is our current FEMA flood map. I'm sure you guys have all seen this map. I just wanted to point out where we have rainfall flooding now. And then I think I've spoken to you guys about this, but what we're seeing now, and which will increase in the future, is that the upper atmosphere is warming, and so with that warming, the atmosphere can hold more water. And so when it does rain, we're seeing the rain come in really intense rainfall events where the rainfall rates are really high. So if you look at our overall rain we're getting an average in a year, it's staying relatively the same, and we're having smaller number of storms. But in those storms, we're seeing just a huge amount of water come down. So you'll have witnessed that this year in November and December and January, where what seemed like not big storms came through, but then we saw a lot of flooding of our streets because it was just coming down so fast that the stormwater system can't take it. So putting that into what that means as far as like frequency of flooding events, something like the 10-year rain event like we saw in January 23, that flooding event is now twice as likely to occur, so it's essentially a 5-year event. And then the 100-year event, which corresponds to the February 1998 flooding event, is about 7 times more likely to occur moving forward. So this really just highlights the need to prepare for more flooding, but also look at our stormwater system. Are there capacity improvements? Are there other things we could be doing to prepare? This is showing El Estero Water Resources Center, our wastewater treatment plant. I don't know if you can see, yeah. It was built it was intentionally built higher than the rest of the surrounding land because of flood risk. And so when we see flooding now, it surrounds the plant. So for instance, in the November event, we lost access to the plant for several hours because of flooding flooding at the entryways. And that is what happens now, and it's going to get worse. With sea level rise combined with the 100-year event, we start to see flooding on property. We are taking a closer look at the lower level rainfall events to really look at what the more frequent flooding is likely to be. But this really speaks to the need to flood-proof the plant further. So moving into adaptation strategies, I think I unintentionally deleted a slide, but this is supposed to be a slide of our stormwater system. Our stormwater system, I think, as you guys know, is supposed to be separate from our sewer system. And our sewer system is predominantly a gravity-fed system, meaning that the sewage essentially flows downhill and then gets treated at El Estero wastewater treatment plant, and then there's an outfall. This is supposed to be a lovely graphic of that. And the two biggest vulnerabilities to the system are stormwater entering the system during flooding events at large quantities. And that can occur through a number of methods: leaky pipes, inappropriate connections, broken sewer laterals, and also just people picking up manholes, sewer collection pipe manholes, and using that to try to get rid of floodwater out of the streets. And so this shows the maximum daily flow that we are seeing through El Estero Water Resources Center, the inflow from the sewer collection system in the 23-24 winter season. And you'll see these really big spikes in flow. Those directly correspond to major rain and flooding events that we had in that season. And so what happens when we get, what this tells us is that there are large amounts of stormwater entering the sewer system during these big rain events. And what happens when we reach capacity in our sewer collection system and treatment system is that it can back up into the system and cause sanitary sewer overflows either back into the system, which occurred in 23 into Mission Creek, or through the outfall. So this is a really big deal. This is something that is very closely watched by our water resources staff and highly managed at this point. So because of these issues, we have conducted several what's called I&I studies, so inflow and infiltration studies. The most recent was updated in 2024. We also have deployed what's called smart covers on our manholes in various locations that combined with our sewer hydraulic model can show where we're seeing inflows. And then we're doing, based on that, sealing pipes and manholes and doing smoke testing to try to find inflows. So this is all stuff that we are currently doing and really moving forward with the changes in rainfall pattern. The adaptation plan really recommends in the low-lying areas really ramping up these efforts. But one other major concern or vulnerability associated with the sewer collection system is the introduction of saline water into the system. So the wastewater treatment plant currently operates, or it treats its sewage with freshwater bacteria. And so if large amounts of saline water enter the system, if it's allowed to enter the system, it will actually kill the treatment process. And it takes almost 3 weeks for the treatment plant to get up and running again. And so to prevent that, if there is high salinity coming in, they'll actually cut the inflow to the plant, resulting in sanitary sewer overflows. And so entry of salt water into the system is a really big deal when we've had it. And the issue with sea level rise is not just the periodic flooding from a storm event or storm surge, but the rise in salinity in the groundwater that's closest to the coast over time. Because then you have leaky pipes being surrounded by salt water, if that makes sense. And so this adaptation plan essentially recommends, based on the timing of sea level rise and other hazards, that the lower portion of the system get pressurized. So it's converted from a gravity system to a low pressure system in phases. And the adaptation plan recommends, depending on how other flood control measures go, that start occurring around 20 years from now. So what that means is, in order for us to pressurize the city-owned public mains or sewer mains, first, all the connections at residences and commercial properties have to be outfitted with pressurized equipment, or what's called a grinder pump. Otherwise, if we pressurized first, we would push sewage back into people's houses. On the flip side, if they pressurize first, they can push sewage into our gravity-fed pipes, and there's no problem. And so the idea is to start this process now of when people come in for new sewer laterals, new connections, instead of putting in gravity infrastructure, putting in pressurized infrastructure, because it's not that much more expensive, so that they don't have to do it again 10 years later. And so that over time, we start to see some pressurization of existing connections. So the plan recommends that in the next year or so that we develop a plan for how we're going to pressurize which areas first, and then how an ordinance for requiring new connections, and then in addition, how we're going to incentivize or otherwise help existing residents pressurize their connections over time, with the goal being public pressurization in 20 years, if that makes sense. So just wrapping up with the wastewater collection system, the key recommendations in the next 20 years are aggressively sealing manholes, particularly in the beach area, lining pipes, implementing the inflow and infiltration master plan, and then planning for that eventual system pressurization that I mentioned in the low-lying areas. For Ellisdale Water Resources Center, it's recommended we work on a flood wall system for the facility, that we manage access issues, one, through developing formal operations plans, the plans for staff to be able to stay at the plant overnight and things like that, and for there not to be deliveries for several days at a time, let's say during flooding events. Informally, this is already done, just so you know. It's more just formalizing up these plans and making sure that it's all out there. In addition, we'll need to look at road improvements into the plant. And then, in addition, the plan recommends looking at ways to increase storage capacity, so things like equalization basins at the plant itself to be able to hold more sewage influent during wet weather events. In addition, there's some infrastructure on the waterfront that's that needs to be either protected or relocated in this time frame, including the desalination intake weir box. That's already a project that's in our capital improvement program and is being started. And then this plan highlights the need to protect Cabrillo Boulevard and the utilities under it. The plan also addresses a more long-term scenario, and really it's about around the end of the century where we'll need to start thinking about whether or not we need to either relocate El Estero or really shore up the access and other things associated with El Estero. So things like a new off-ramp off the highway, like big investments into the site. And so as part of permit requirements for this plan, we did have to identify potential relocation sites that the city already owns, and there aren't that many sites that big. And so the one identified in the plan is the municipal golf course, which is 107 acres, and we need about 13 acres. That does not mean that we are moving this plan to the golf course. In reality, over the next 25 to 50 years, all our neighboring jurisdictions, in particular Goleta Sanitary, are going to be experiencing the same issues. And so really, if we're going to talk about these major investment, it really makes sense to team up and regionalize. And so that is a conversation that we're already starting. How can we start doing more regional cooperation with regard to our sewage treatment? So just to round up, we're closely monitoring system conditions. I mentioned that we're looking at that stormwater modeling project. And then we're really beginning to look at funding. So in the next 20 years, we need about $2 to $3 million for studies, and then between $50 and $130 million in infrastructure modifications, depending on what options are done. And so clearly we're not sitting on $130 million right now. And so this, how this will be funded and through what revenue sources is a key focus of the next year. And this is my contact information. And again, the plan's available at our website. And again, the comment period ends February 10th. So that ends my presentation. If there's any questions.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question? Thank you. Thank you so much for that very eye-opening and concerning presentation. I think I'm glad I'm going to be dead by the time this stuff gets. It's a good thing about being old. So I want to go back to the pressurization issue and the challenge of outfitting every building in the city with a pressure system. I realize you're talking about rolling it out over time and starting with new projects and people that are having to put in new sewer laterals, but how do you imagine reaching all the other buildings?
That's a very good question. Just so we're clear, it is just the low-lying area, and in particular the area directly adjacent to the waterfront, moving northward to Highway 101.
Is that still
That's still a lot of people, yes. So that's part of the plan that we need to come forward with in the next year for how we're going to actually roll this out. That will also look at a number of options. We would not likely do it all at once. We'd probably take different areas that make sense. And also, from an operational standpoint, because of flooding and other reasons, it does also just make sense to take certain areas and isolate them, if that makes sense. And we're already doing some of that work now. So yes, that really is the task, and it's a big one. I'm not discounting that, but costing that out, how much will it cost each homeowner, who will do it, how it will get rolled out, that's really the details to come.
And just to follow up quickly,
Yeah.
I'm thinking particularly of the Lower East Side, where there's so much flooding risk, and it's not an affluent area.
Yes.
It's not an area where the homeowners may have that capacity.
Yes, I think that's a very good comment, and we've heard that from council and every commission, that financially and just doing it, that we really need to be offering help. And so we'll be looking at mechanisms to do that and funding sources.
There we go. So I have a few questions. The first is something that I've mentioned in the past of, we're still using these linear sort of systems of 100-year flood, 50-year flood based on historical data that we're not changing. Our climate change isn't using the same models. So how are we doing anything to address that issue for modeling? Which I realize it's kind of tough since this is new to us, right?
Yeah, committee member, it's a tough one because to know an average of how something's changed, it really takes almost like at least 10 years, if not more, of data to show a bigger change, a more long-term change, because there's so much noise in the data seasonally. And so that is a struggle. How we're defining these year storms, is no longer accurate. And so at this point, we're just really trying to pin them to what we've seen before and what kind of impacts they might be. That's part of why the stormwater modeling effort, one of the big purposes of that effort is to look at lower level storms, the ones that are much more frequent, where we're seeing all this flooding now much more frequently, so that we can map that area that's not just the 100-year event, which is, a big portion of the city is in the 100-year event. But what is that area that's flooding all the time? Because we all kind of know it living here, but it's not mapped somewhere. Like the 5-year, the very common events that are happening every year now. Mapping those, looking at depths, how can we relieve that flooding, in addition to the bigger events. But yes, I agree that is a major problem about the way that we're characterizing things historically. We're just kind of at this point trying to put it into terms that people know, but I think that is a really good comment.
Yeah, I noticed, bicycling after these recent rains, how much little landslides there were in a lot of places, which was kind of related to that. The other one is on my page 9, slide 26, is I was wondering, I understand that there's cracks in old pipes and they get water seeping in. We have a lot of groundwater here during these events. And I was curious how old the pipes were and what they would be replaced with, and how you would go about that, or would you change the size? Like, are the materials still the same? Like how do you deal with that?
Yes, I'll answer that to the best of my knowledge. I usually do this presentation with somebody from Water Resources who can get all geeky on this stuff. But essentially with pressurized systems, the pipes can be much smaller because part of the gravity-fed system is that you have to be going downhill and you have to have a certain amount of head, and so the pipes are actually really much smaller, and so in some cases it's actually would be cheaper for somebody to pressurize their line just because of the amount of pipe you would need, and you don't need as big of a depth. So really we're talking about either slipping through existing pipe corridors, a whole new pipe that's much smaller, or above the existing pipes having these small little pipes, in addition to needing the grinder pump. So we're talking about whole new systems. We're not talking about rehabbing existing pipes, because with pressurization you really need to know that they are adequate. And I don't know how old the sewer system is, but my understanding is it's It's old.
It's old.
Yeah.
It's an older town.
It's not in
right.
the greatest of conditions,
Right.
yes.
A lot of it was vitrified clay.
Oh, see, I was curious
Yeah.
about that. Yeah, yeah.
Just looks like terracotta.
I mean, we can speak that it's just incredibly variable from the involvement Creeks has had. The Water Resources has done extensive rehabbing. They had a whole prioritization of finding the locations to rehab and basically reline the inside of existing pipes.
Okay.
And so they've been working through that over many, many years.
Wow. Okay, and then on slide 30, I had a few questions. So flood wall, I mean, it can mean two things in my mind. Like some cities actually put a pressure of fresh water to keep salt water from coming in. But do you mean like a physical wall or a water pressure wall when you say flood wall?
Is your question about at El Estero?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm talking about a flood, like a wall.
A physical wall.
A physical
Okay.
wall system. Yeah, but again, this is one of those, like, somebody needs to tell us what the best option is, because we also need to consider how stormwater is getting off the site. It's not just a wall, it's definitely going to be a system of improvements. The other thing to look at, and which we are incorporating into our current projects, are elevation of key infrastructure. We've already started that. There's a big electrical upgrade project at the plant now, and all of that new infrastructure is being elevated at a much higher elevation. So it's a combo of the two, but it will be some kind of flood actual wall system.
Okay. And then the other thing is on the Cabrillo Boulevard utilities. Are they considering relocating those now, or are they planning on waiting?
So that is the subject of the waterfront plan, which you guys will be hearing about in the next few months. But there is an assumption in that plan and in our sea level rise adaptation plan that we will protect, at least in this near and midterm time period, Cabrillo Boulevard. So there's an assumption that erosion is not going to come into Cabrillo Boulevard over time because we'll protect it. There might be flooding, though. That's different than erosion. So to the extent that these utilities are vulnerable to flooding, so like have open manholes or other things, they need to be flood-proofed. And that does need to happen with several utilities. But there is an assumption that we will be protecting Cabrillo Boulevard from erosion.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I was curious if there's other things in play that relate to the amount of stormwater that enters the system, like I've mentioned in the past, having a more rigorous Santa Barbara rule than the more regional rule for keeping water on site for building sites, so it doesn't leave to begin with. And I know in the past we've heard some talks on having bioswales, and people have discussed permeable pavement, and maybe even some detention basins as needed. Like what other things are going on to kind of just lower the amount of stormwater to begin with?
I can jump in and speak to this one. So as far as the modeling, I think you're referring to our stormwater requirements and the different storms that applicants who come in for development projects are required to capture and infiltrate. Yeah, those are based on the Santa Barbara County ones. And so that's the standard right now. It is something we could explore in the future. I can say if we're looking at increasing the intensity of those storms or the amount of rainfall, I think it's a give and a take, because it's already challenging for people to comply with our requirements in certain cases. And then I'll just add, we talked last meeting at the CIP meeting about a future Creeks Division project for a green infrastructure plan. And so I think that's going to really dovetail well with the storm, for specifically the drainage study for Laguna Channel. Like, where are opportunities that we could try to alleviate some of that flooding with green infrastructure solutions instead of, hard gray storm drain system improvements. And so as far as how much those LAD components might be part of what Melissa's talking about. I think some of these areas that's pretty challenging because it is such shallow groundwater. You don't have really an opportunity to put more of that water in the ground because we're already seeing groundwater flooding. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
So with the stormwater model, we're starting with Laguna Watershed, but the idea is over time for the model to be built out for the whole stormwater system. And that has a lot of benefits because it not only are we able to look at capacity improvements, but we're able to look at, well, what if this watershed were to change and how, and also to line it up with the sewer model and see if where there might be connections and things like that by running the models. And so it's really the starting point for these other studies. And so we are, Creeks is part of that project team to make sure that they get the information they need out of this model for the green infrastructure plan.
Cool, thank
Yeah.
you.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question? Melissa, I kind of going back to slide number 6, we talked about active major projects, and I understand that the focus today is on the wastewater, as you mentioned, but I do have a question. If you could at least give me a short explanation as to what Airport Climate Adaptation Plan encompasses or means.
Sure. So similar to what this plan did as far as looking at all the different climate hazards, the airport is doing the same type of plan. The biggest hazard out there is actually from rainfall flooding. And they actually did a very unique assessment that essentially looked at all the combined hazards and tied it to closure of the airport as the trigger. And so they've developed a vulnerability study in I think the next month, or they've already started. They're starting to outline some alternatives that they would look at further, such as like, there's a lot of alternatives. I guess I don't want to get into them because I don't know all the details. So in the next year, they'll be studying those alternatives and looking at costing. That dovetails with 2 other efforts they have going on. One is a drainage master plan. So those are like capacity improvements within their stormwater system that they are starting to work on. In addition, this information is being fed into their bigger master planning effort so that they know which areas are going to be flooding and which are not.
Thank you, and forgive me, I don't know the name of the creek that runs by the airport, but my understanding, at least in the rain events that they've had, is that part of it is the overflowing of that creek due to the amount of water that's being collected in a short amount of time. Is that
Yeah,
general?
so
Yes?
there's several creeks that run into Goleta Slough. The one that we've been having trouble with this last few rain events was Los Carneros. And part of that was due to there's a large deposition of sediment there that needed to be dredged out. And so it was filling up capacity. In addition, that system was, again, designed for different historic storm levels. Just like all of our stormwater infrastructure, it's not designed for these really heavy, fast rain events. And so my understanding of the recent closures were more to do with the stormwater capacity of the stormwater system backing up and then coming over the road onto the airport than anything. Yeah.
Thank you, appreciate it. I think as a committee, I would love to make a note or a request that as we do learn more about the airport's plan and as it relates to creeks that may have relationship to our committee, that we're at least informed as there are important aspects of that to come forward. Again, as a reminder, I'm the lodging guy. And so an airport is important to the entire community as well. But from a lodging standpoint, it's important for the airport to work perfectly all the time. And I'm sure that's true not only for us, but for the community as well. So that was part of the part of it that piqued my interest. And anyway, I would appreciate that as a committee if that's some information that would be pertinent. I would think it would be, and appreciate your time about it. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can make a note to follow up with that on a future presentation for the committee.
Just quickly noting, Jessica Metzger, the one kind of heading up this plan, is kicking off actually tonight with the Airport Commission their presentation of this assessment. So I'm sure we can get something on our calendars for that. So
My comment had to absolutely do with the airport and the inherent siloing of the city's efforts vis-a-vis the incredible work we do with Creeks, and yet Creeks has absolutely, we're the brain trust for how to handle the hydrologic aspects of our watersheds, and yet the Creeks division, my understanding is, has really nothing to do with the airport sitting in Goleta Slough. I mean, if we want to talk about, and I understand lodging and all of that, but my gosh, it saddens me to no end that we, the collective we, the Creeks, where, as I said, where the brain trust is housed on how to manage an estuarian environment in which you have, of course it's going to be rainfall, and it's the worst situation possible with concrete channels and not allowing the estuary to function as a sponge. And so my request, in addition to maybe hearing what is going on, but we have no say, is to somehow get through to the city council that the expertise lies here with Creek staff to make a difference with the airport. And I'm talking long-term. So I'm just passionately making that comment.
not to interrupt, but if we can keep to questions first and then open up to public comment and then to comments
So
from
this is a
committee.
follow-up question to that, which is, the creeks don't belong to the city of Santa Barbara, the ones that are adjacent to the airport, am I correct? Or are they within the city's territory?
A portion of all the creeks are within the city's jurisdiction. And I don't know,
'Cause then my question would be,
Ms.
what
Markey,
kind
if you
of
want to
power do we
comment
have over?
on Creek's involvement.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
A small portion, but yeah.
And is there a ongoing relationship with the city of Goleta, assuming this is in the city of Goleta rather than the county, about how to manage these?
Yeah, so the Goleta Slough Management Committee is basically all the jurisdictions and entities that have anything to do with Goleta Slough. And so this is a subject of that committee and coordination. In addition, I don't know, Ms. Markey, if you want to, the airport does, and especially lately, is actively working with us. So I don't know if you wanted to talk about them.
No, just that I appreciate the comment, and we are working on kind of the de-siloing as you described it, and so we'll definitely see if we can get a presentation scheduled. As Stephanie mentioned, their airport subcommittee is tonight, and they're actually hearing that plan tonight. So I'm sure that in a future meeting we can do that and have input.
Well, one quick question here. On the pressure systems, which sound interesting in future, is the technology developed, and is there some demand to make capital investments to make these systems cheaper and better? I'm just curious.
Great question. So these systems have been around forever. So they're extremely common throughout the U.S. Think places like Miami, like most of Florida,
Yeah.
Louisiana. They're extremely common. Even Rincon Beach, Los Osos, they both just switched over to pressurized system. This is the proven technology. It's not unusual or new or innovative. So it's tried and true, but it's just not what we have right now, if that makes sense.
It does, and there's demand, which is good.
Yes, so there are firms, this is what they do, and yeah, it's not like a new industry or something like that, yeah.
I had a follow-up question just on that, because you mentioned it price-wise, it wasn't that much more expensive, and I was just curious, because I know in the past, when there's been efforts to inspect and make repairs to private laterals, which is a really big challenge for the city, since that's not city property, that's private property, there's been some resistance or pushback a little bit. So I was just curious if you have ballpark, and I don't have any idea what this costs, but.
Yeah, so Committee Member Owens, it's when you're comparing putting in a whole new lateral to a whole new pressurized system. It is probably like $5,000 more, and it's more to maintain because there's pumping involved. But it really depends, again, because there are certain things that actually make the pressurized pipes cheaper and things like that. So it really depends on your conditions of your site. I would say it is going to be a little bit more expensive. If you don't have any triggers for doing these improvements now, though, of course, I think the investment is something between $15,000 and $20,000. But a gravity-fed sewer lateral is around 10 to 15. Yeah, so it really depends on the situation. We have some long laterals here where pressurization would actually help the design. But it's really if whether or not you're already putting something new in. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. If there's no more questions, then is there any comment from the committee?
We'll do
from the-
public comment first, from the public.
Oh, okay.
But yes, there's no public comments at this time.
Okay. Then hearing no public comments, are there any comments from committee members? Hearing no comments from committee members, then we will move on to agenda item 7B, fiscal year 2025 water quality research and monitoring program summary.
Right, while we pull up those slides, I just wanted to say thank you again to Melissa for joining us tonight.
Here on that.
All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Lori Vanderbriefholt, our water quality analyst, to give you guys an update on the 2025 year water quality monitoring program.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me get situated here. So I'm going to talk about fiscal year 2025. I've been in this role since April of last year, and I am still learning my way around fiscal years versus calendar years versus water years, so please forgive me if I misspeak. But to get started, let's see, is it the mouse? All right, so our research and monitoring plan is based on our required monitoring for grants and permits, as well as research projects. It's an adaptive program, and it's based on input from city staff, scientific community, water board, the CAC, our public. We update our questions and sampling on an annual basis. I'm gonna keep wanting to press the keyboard. The purpose of our research plan is to develop strategies for water quality improvement. That includes evaluating and prioritizing our projects and programs, tracking long-term trends to understand changes over time in surface water quality, provide clear and accessible information to the public about water quality, and to understand the role of climate change and sea level rise, as we just heard about, in altering creek conditions. And our overarching long and short-term goals are to assess pollutants, and not just to identify and quantify pollutants, but also to evaluate and source track those pollutants. We want to evaluate our projects from the Creeks Division, implement hydrologic models in order to predict those alterations in flow due to climate change, evaluate the role of infiltration and groundwater movement on creek water quality and quantity, again, with that intersection of sea level rise, it's theme tonight, and wherever feasible, to evaluate the effectiveness of the city's programs, for example, street sweeping or outreach in reducing pollutants. We want to evaluate long-term trends in water quality and quantity. We want to meet our monitoring requirements for grants and project permits. And of course, we want to meet our general permit monitoring requirements and investigate our 303D listed water body impairments and employ contemporary tools to conduct advanced research and monitoring with a focus on rigorous quality standards and data management methods. So now that I've got all that background out of the way, fiscal year 2025 consisted of our NPDES general permit monitoring, which included annual outfall testing and biweekly 303D sampling. Also, our long-term monitoring consisting of biweekly and quarterly sampling at selected sites and bioassessment. Our project assessment in fiscal year 25 focused on the bird refuge, which I'll be showing some data about that tonight. And then I'm also going to give you a brief update on some of our research projects from fiscal year 25, our beach swimming risk assessment, BITE 23, the Clean Streets, Clean Seas project, and the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition. All right, so jumping into the bird refuge, this is an immense data set. We have over 500,000 data points. And these data points stretch from 2013 up until, well, for this presentation, the end of 2025, but we're still monitoring. And so we have 3 locations. What we call T1 is sort of in the bird refuge up here, if you can see my pointer. T2 is down towards the outlet. And then we also have a data logger in the lagoon. So at any given point, we have up to 3 data loggers, 1 deployed at each location. They do need to periodically be taken out for maintenance, calibration, and so forth. So that data set from 2013 to 2025 isn't every day at all 3 locations. It's a patchwork. But these data loggers, they log every 15 to 20 minutes the dissolved oxygen, salinity, temperature, pH, and chlorophyll levels. So for tonight, I'm just going to focus on what we call T2. That's that location down here in the refuge near the outlet or outlet arm. And the reason why I'm focusing on that side is it is our most complete data set. T2, we have data from May of 2013 through December of 2025. Of the 3 locations, we have the most data points for it. And we're looking right now at the dissolved oxygen levels. So looking at those data points and binning them into pre-restoration project and after our restoration project. And you can see that the data size, the pre is over 127,000 data points. And after restoration, we have over 72,000 data points. And what we see is a significant increase in dissolved oxygen after our restoration work. And that's, you can see that white line is the median, comparing it between the pre and the post. And so that median is 2.2 times higher improvement in dissolved oxygen. That puts that median in compliance with the water quality objective for warm water habitat. Overall in the data set, we see less time spent in anoxic and hypoxic conditions. And this could be due to our restoration efforts. It could also be due to storms. We had some wet years in there. We are still analyzing this data. As I said, it's a very large data set, and we're trying to determine what the most appropriate way to analyze this data. But this looks very promising. It's very encouraging. All right, moving on to our beach swimming risk assessment project. So the CAC in May of 2024 received a presentation on this, you might recall. And if you don't, that's fine. We're actually hoping to come back to you again later this spring or summer to give an update with this new data. But just to refresh your memory, our 4 beaches, Arroyo Burro, Ledbetter, East Beach at Mission, East Beach at Sycamore, were sampled on 4 dates during summer dry weather in 2022. Those samples, the surf zone samples, were analyzed for human fecal markers, DNA-based markers, and pathogens. We performed a risk assessment in-house. And in that presentation, Jill Murray shared that the calculated estimated risk was 100 times lower than the EPA threshold of 3.2%, which is great news. But what about the winter weather? Winter wet or winter dry weather, what's the swimming risk there? So we worked with UCSB to go back to some archived samples during the winter of 2022 and 2023. We selected 3 winter dry weather dates, 4 winter wet weather dates, and those rainfall amounts, as you can see, spanned a small storm and then a very large storm, although not as large as our most recent storms. And you can see on this timeline on the bottom, the summer dry events are in this sort of gray-brown arrow. Our winter dry are the yellow arrows with the red outline, and the winter wet with the red arrows. This is on a timeline with dates and showing the precipitation in downtown Santa Barbara. To sort of see, we captured a nice range of conditions there. So these risk calculations on this winter wet and dry weather is still ongoing in-house, but as soon as we have it ready, we'd like to bring it to you and give a more detailed presentation. Moving on to our BITE project. This is one of SCWRP's, which is a Southern California Coastal Water Resource Research Project. We joined in fiscal year 23. The aim of this project is to use 2 different human markers to determine the extent and magnitude of human fecal contamination at Southern California beaches, so in the surf zone, as well as in the creeks or storm drains that discharge to those beaches. And so we're one part, and this ranges all the way down to San Diego. I believe we're the most northern portion of this study. And so there's 2 parts to this study. The first is an intercalibration. All the labs or municipalities participating in October were sent 21 blinded samples that were either blanks or spiked with sewage in different amounts, and you didn't know what was what. So we filtered them in-house. We delivered those filters to the Los Angeles County Sanitation District's lab, who analyzed them for us. SCWRP interpreted the results, and we were deemed successful. All of our blanks were clean, and all of our spiked samples had the right amount of sewage. So that's great. That means we're able to proceed and do some actual sampling. So we have chosen Arroyo Burro for our site. So we are sampling the surf zone, as well as Arroyo Burro Creek at Cliff Drive, so right here before it spills over into the lagoon. The plan is to sample 30 dry weather dates, conditions sort of in this upper photo here, as well as 30 wet weather dates, more like this lower photo. And I have sampled actually where that channel is completely filled with water. During fiscal year 2025, we sampled on 18 of those 30 dates, and we have completed 22 of the wet weather dates. So again, we're continuing on into fiscal year 26, and as soon as we have results to share, I will bring them to share with you. All right, moving on to our Clean Streets, Clean Seas grant. As a reminder, this is our big NOAA grant. The city is the principal investigator. We're working closely with USC Sea Grant, UCSB, Dr. Trish Holden's lab, and others. Our fiscal year 2025 work included microplastic sampling in the creeks, as well as street sweeper debris sampling for microplastics analysis. And so how we sampled for microplastics in the creeks is we took a portable sampler here in the center photo, and we modified it so that we could filter for microplastics in situ, inside this device. So here we're at Rocky Nook. We've got that nice pedestrian bridge there. We have our tubing. It's hard to see in this photo, but we've got down at the bottom into the creek. Water is being pumped up the line. It enters the sampler. It's a peristaltic pump, so the water never touches anything except the inside of that tubing. And it's going through a stack of sieves. And these are different sizes. So the top is, I think, 355 microns. Then we go through 125 microns, and then 63 microns. And this is so that they can characterize what microplastics are found at each of the different sizes. So the water is being pumped through. We collected a composite of approximately 100 liters for each sample. And then when we're done, we seal off these sieves and bring them to UCSB for analysis. And that analysis is ongoing right now. The plan was to complete 3 wet weather storm events and 3 dry weather events. In fiscal year 25, we completed all 3 wet weather events and 1 dry weather event, and we're continuing on into fiscal year 26. And let me just show you, there's a lot of information on these, so I'll just give you the high points. We sampled 3 storms in fiscal year 25, a small storm earlier in the year, followed by a medium storm, followed by an even larger storm. And what you have at our 2 locations, I should have said that earlier, we're studying Mission Creek at Rocky Nook and at Gutierrez, so we're spanning that urban stretch so we can see what's that baseline we're seeing up above and how much is it potentially growing by the time you get down below. So the hydrographs are the gauge of how high the water level is at those locations in the creek, and at the bottom is the precipitation, the amount of rainfall that's fallen downtown. For both the medium and the large storm, we were able to capture the rising edge of the storm, so that's those red lines, as well as the falling edge in green. And so for these two storms, all of those red lines together were one sample. So we split up that 100 liters into many small increments, so that combined all together, that could be the rising sample, and then similarly for the falling in the green. And this was very challenging to plan because you're watching and you're waiting the gauge, you're watching it, it's going, we got to get out there, we got to get out there and sample. But I think we did a really good job. So all of these samples are at UCSB being analyzed. And again, we have dry weather samples that will be compared to it. The other part of that project was the street sweeping debris. And so those street sweepers dump all of their debris into these large bins at the annex yard. We got to jump inside and crawl around trying to get a representative sample from every part of that bin into this bucket here, which we weigh so we know how much material we collected. We sift it through a mesh screen here that we then seal up in aluminum. And again, since it's microplastics, you don't want to use any plastics in your sampling material, right? So that's why everything here is metal. So we seal it up in aluminum and we bring it to UCSB for analysis. And again, as I've said with all these projects, it's ongoing. As soon as we have something to report, we will bring it back to you. And lastly, the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition. So we joined in 2024. This is a regional collection of agencies. In fiscal year 25, we attended all of the quarterly meetings, and we recommended funding 6 projects in fiscal year 26. That's a little over $37,000 from Measure B funding. In particular, street sweeping, we wanted to recommend funding for this project, and in fact, the rainfall simulator, which you might have heard about in previous presentations, is coming to Santa Barbara next month. And if you have questions about that, I'm sure Jill would love to give us more information. But we also recommended funding for other projects, such as looking at the field performance of biofiltration installations, stream channel restoration, regional bioassessment, the mechanisms of pollutant removal using flow-through filtration, and recreational water quality projects. So that was a very, very quick overview, trying to keep it within time. But our next steps are to complete our annual water quality report, which we plan to do by the end of this month. We want to complete our fiscal year 26 sampling, and I want to come back to you in June to present our proposed fiscal year 27 sampling plan. So that is all I have.
Thank you. Do any committee members have any questions?
I do, Madam Chair. So on my slide 13, Clean Streets, Clean Sea Grants, I was just curious about the sampling. And, you know, I kind of think of plastics, that every type of plastic has a different density and different sizes have different properties. Like, how do you decide where you're going to take your sampling from, and how does that make a difference?
Right. So with in particular with the creek sampling here, it's hard to, in this photo, the creek level's quite low, but especially during the storm events, you know, those creek channels were really full. So while we're collecting those samples, it takes a while to pump 10 liters. And so we were moving that tubing both across the channel slowly in increments and up and down in depth. So we were trying to capture a representation of, as best we could, the entire water column.
Oh, great.
And we did the same with the dry weather, but it's much smaller. We didn't have to move it as much.
Okay, and then I had one more question. And that was on Andre Clark Bird Refuge Restoration. And what correlates to these anoxic events that in your experience?
I might defer that question to Jill Murray.
We have not found any kind of
weather conditions that correlate with the anoxic conditions, other than it's usually follows a very intense algal bloom. So we'll have, really pea soup water, and then that dies. The DO stays really low for a while. So part of that is we don't have a lot of circulation during those times. If the, rainwater is flushing through there, we're going to have good oxygen levels. Does that help?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Also, every time I hear about these water quality monitoring talks, I'm so impressed. Thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you for your questions. You obviously know a lot about what we're doing. Can I go back to the microplastic sampling one? One thing we're learning is that the bulk of the microplastics are going to be the tire wear particles. And so the particles that are brightly colored and more fun to look at, those are generally lighter. They float they're more in the water column. The tire wear particles are somewhere in between a typical plastic and sand, so they are heavier than water. And so we're trying to get as many of them as we can by having we have a tube with like a strainer, and so it's moving around, but we're not capturing the bed load. And so there could be more tire wear particles moving through the bed load that we're not picking up, and that's going to have to be somebody else's study.
And this is a little non sequitur, but I keep reading about the tire chemicals coming off and their impact. Is it Chinook salmon? A certain type of salmon.
Coho, I believe.
And are we finding anything relative to our coastal fish as well?
So there are a lot of scientists that are studying that exact question. I don't know of any fish species that is having such as an acute response, but that it's more lower levels of toxicity to, I think, all salmonids. And that's that one chemical that they've identified, 6-PPD quinone, that they've identified specifically in the Pacific Northwest. And there are thousands more chemicals that we don't really know. So, and there are so many chemicals added to the rubber plasticizers. We don't really know what their impact is yet.
Thank you.
I had a question on the bird refuge. Is there any measurement you've done to the impact on animal life with these improvements? Either any numbers or health, or is that not possible?
Well, first of all, the dissolved oxygen, that is the main reason we're trying to raise the dissolved oxygen. We're not going to have any fish in the bird refuge lakeside until the DO is higher, and we don't have these, we're having periods where it's really can't even measure any oxygen for weeks at a time, top to bottom. There will be no fish in the bird refuge until that is rectified. But we do sample for fish species, and Erin can talk about that.
Yeah, I was going to echo what Jill said. And Jill, I just wanted to clarify, these results go through the end of 2025, so including this past summer where we had, okay. So, as Lori was mentioning, is this a trend from the benefit of the restoration project we did, or is this the weather? We did have a pretty dry winter last winter, and so this summer we did see some minor anoxic events, but nothing like we've seen in the past. And so as far as monitoring, we are monitoring now twice a year for tidewater gobies in the estuary, in the lake, and a few of the tributaries that come into the bird refuge. And so as part of that, I can't remember if we've reported this or not to you, but there were no gobies just prior to the project taking place in the estuary side of the bird refuge, where we did some improvements to kind of widen the estuary and create some lower lying, better habitat for them to breed in. The first summer post-project, they were there, they were breeding, which was great. And so we're still monitoring this. The trends are, not super clear. The next summer, after we had really heavy rainfall, they weren't in the estuary again, but they had migrated all the way across the lake into some of the tributaries that come into it. So gobies tend to have these really boom and bust populations and cycles, and so we're, it's hard to say exactly why, but it's a great sign that conditions within the lake side of the estuary were viable for those fish to make it through. When we do our sampling in the summer, and so when we did our sampling in the summer, the last 3 years, no gobies were found in the I call it the lagoon, the lake, the north side of Cabrillo itself. They were in those tributaries coming in.
And then one other measure we have is that we do bioassessment monitoring in the estuary there. And so I haven't actually looked at the results of that. We haven't gotten them this year. And so really think about whether we're seeing an improvement there. And then we've also done some pre-project sampling on the bird refuge side I want to say they were finding chironomids, things that can really handle periods of low dissolved oxygen. So we should go back and measure that again.
And I'll just additionally add, with the monitoring that we're doing for tidewater gobies, we are catching other fish, and so we are taking that data and using that as well. And so we're seeing all sorts of different fish in the estuary side, primarily in the lake itself. We're mostly seeing non-native mosquito fish, but we can see changes even within that mosquito fish population. Whether it's thousands versus 0, and so those data points as well are kind of informing what's going on with the water quality.
Any further questions from the committee? Were you about to? Oh, okay. I think we're doing, okay. Is there any public comment?
We have no public speakers for this item.
So with no public comment, then do we have any committee member comment?
Thank you. I think what might be wonderful to have, and I don't even know who to look at anymore given the changes, but we're in year 2 post-restoration of Andre Clark, yes. And I'm really curious about how many times we've had to do mechanical opening on the berm. And so maybe just not a big presentation, but just a little one post-rain events, because that's what's really, we're counting on that to flush, and along with the weir changes and everything. But so maybe in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I can just briefly say, we are seeing physical scum come out of the bird refuge. A certain amount of flushing is happening, but to what depth and how much, and is it enough is really the question. And so Jill's team has also been doing some depth monitoring to try and kind of measure how much of that fluff is there. And so, yeah, I think we could prepare a presentation that looks at kind of the water quality, the physical, and even the biological components of it thus far. I will say it's still very early days.
Any other comment from the committee?
Just a thank you for that really thorough and interesting presentation. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Did I hear any other comment? And there are no more agenda items after this, so then we will adjourn this meeting at 6:48 p.m. Thank you all for coming.